Hello, everyone, and welcome to TechCrunch's Spotlight on Atlanta. We've got a great investor panel here today. I'm joined by Sean O'Brien, who works with Overline Ventures, and I'm also joined by Shyla Neves-Burney, who's with us from Zane Venture Fund. We have a great panel today for you guys, and I think a great place to get started is, why don't you guys both describe to me what is so interesting about investing in Atlanta right now?
Shyla, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So what I think is incredible about just Atlanta as a whole, right? We have so many different things here, not only our universities, not only the culture, the diversity. I just think that we are set up for success in so many different ways, right? And so for me, who kind of goes in early in deals like at the pre-seed level and seed, I'm just excited about the opportunities that I continue to see here. People either moving here or people who are here building companies. For us, is primarily we're interested in tech companies. And so there's just no limit for the talent. And so it's always exciting to see the talent that's coming out of the Atlanta university systems. And so for me, that's what I find exciting, just the talent.
Yeah, I would second that. We, as pre-seed and seed investors, my partner Michael and I, we screened first on founding team, and I agree with Shyla completely. The talent that's here building in the Atlanta ecosystem is second to none. We've got lots of universities and colleges that are cranking out, top tier talent, not only in technology, but in deep tech and in consumer-related businesses as well. So talent, we've got a friendly ecosystem full of funding sources as well as other support sources for founders who are building our community. We've got a mayor who's very pro-business and pro-technology, and a set of business laws that make it a great place to build and grow a business. And we just have a different way of doing things down here in Atlanta. Everybody here is friendly, collaborative. There's not a lot of sharp elbows in the city. And there's a lot of resources that come together to support founders on the earliest stages all the way through their growth stages of their companies. So it's a great city to build in and a great moment in time for our city.
Mm-hmm. And knowing that you both talked a lot about talent, that's definitely something I've heard time and time again about the Atlanta ecosystem. It's just how strong and diverse the talent base there is. And sort of looking at the types of companies that are getting built or the types of companies you guys are both interested in, are there any sectors or hidden gems that you find in Atlanta that it seems like Atlanta entrepreneurs are particularly good at?
I'm going to say B2B SaaS. My venture partner has made a lot of deals in that sector, and those deals tend to do well here in the South. And so we've kind of leaned into that. We found a few SaaS companies that we've invested in. And so I think that's one of the critical ones. But, as Sean said, like deep tech is coming. We have a biomedical, it's called, Georgia Tech Square or Science Square. So there's biotech that's here now. It's not an industry that we invest in, but it is here, right? There are funds that have been set up for that particular. In terms of other sectors, fintech was huge at one point. I'm not sure if it is right now here in the Southeast. Sean may know differently. Not from some of the companies I've looked at, folks have kind of moved away or pivoted away from some of the fintech. That was the payments, I guess, back in like 2020 to 2021, when companies like Stripe were coming out and all of these competitors came out. I don't see a lot of that now, but for me, I try to pay close attention to enterprise SaaS, because those are the companies I'm looking for and that have been tended to scale in the past.
Yeah, I think B2B SaaS clearly has been a winner for our community. I would say that fintech, we still see a lot of promising fintechs at a lot, at all stages. We've got some in our portfolio, and then looking around the community, there's some breakouts like Greenlight Financial that are continuing to truck along. We've recently been known for Web3, which I know is not really a vogue spot to be investing in the market currently, but we've got a great community there. We've got a long history of MarTech and sales technology building in the city. We're really excited about some of the newer industries like AI. There's a lot of really cool things happening right here in our community in AI. And then clearly we are without a doubt a leader in logistics and supply chain. Taking advantage of some of our big Fortune 100 companies like UPS, obviously, Home Depot, and others that have big supply chain and logistics backgrounds. We've got a number of notable breakouts here in the community, and a lot of early stage startups that are building to solve some of those critical opportunities, that many of which were highlighted during some of the supply chain issues of COVID. So one of the things that we really love is the diversity of not only talent here, but the diversity of types of businesses that are being built right here in the community.
Mm-hmm. And knowing that you just mentioned that the city has some of those big corporations, those Fortune 500 and 100 companies based there, that is definitely an asset for the city compared to, say, some other locations that just don't have that sort of density of those big corporate players. And how do you think that is a strength for the Atlanta ecosystem, for these startups building somewhere where there are these large companies right in their backyard?
It's huge. I'll just jump in on that one. We've got some notable large companies that have been very direct in their support of fostering, entrepreneurship and innovation in our city. We've got, I think, 13 now corporate partners that are supporting the Engage program, which is deliberately trying to match corporate buyers with innovation in the form of startups. So that's one tangible example. We've got other companies, large companies like Cox Enterprises, which is a $20 billion private company that has been a contributor in many key ways to the local startup ecosystem through funding programs like Engage, programs like Techstars Atlanta and Techstars Social Impact, but always being there with a spirit of helping out, under the mantra that if it's good for Atlanta, it's good for Cox. But the most, notable way they can help is by embracing early stage innovation in the form of becoming a customer. The best, funding for many companies is customer funding. And so we've got that spirit of adopting early, which is key. We've also got the spirit of, the executives and the leadership teams of these large companies have shown an interest in leaning in and supporting founders that are building through mentorship, through formal advisory work and the like. And then just being an active contributor to getting this flywheel cranking that we're all trying to accelerate here to create sort of this launching pad for the next generation of founders is something that I think our large corporate partners are really keenly interested in doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would totally agree. We work with a few of them, like Southern Company, who's looking for some of the talent to become part of their diverse suppliers. And so we've tried to get some of our portfolio companies into corporations for that reason. Just Sean's point about like getting these corporations as a customer more than anything, I think is critical versus looking at them as a potential investor. And so we tried to take that strategy with some of our portfolio companies who are enterprise technology companies. And so I totally agree. Engage is sort of like the house for all of these particular corporates. I think there's a graduation tomorrow, when we'll get a look at some of the companies that have come out of Engage. And this is where the corporate partners play a really strong role in some of these early stage companies.
Definitely. And knowing that since you both do invest at the early stages, I was going to ask you about sort of what the late stage funding environment looks like in Atlanta and kind of what are the strengths there and maybe what are some of the holes that it would be better for the ecosystem to get someone to fill?
I'm going to let Sean go there because I pay particular attention to where I promised my LPs I was going to pay, and that's in the early stage. And so Sean may have some, even though I know a lot of the late stage, I don't know what's happening with late stage companies.
Yeah, we are also focused primarily on pre-seed and seed investing, but part of our job as a good venture partner for our portfolio companies is being deliberate about maintaining relationships with downstream investors. And so while we will write checks in the later stages through our opportunity fund, we really spend an awful lot of time, collaborating with some of the downstream investors. Many of them are in the coastal cities where you'd expect in Boston and New York and San Francisco. But we've got some great, Series B and beyond investors here in Atlanta. I would say that when Michael and I started Overline, we thought that the most acute need in the funding ecosystem was at the earliest stages. at formation stage, two founders and an idea, concept on a whiteboard that they want to turn into code and turn into product and turn it ultimately into a company. And so that's where we started. And we've been, trying to drive, collaboration to make sure that as we get past the point where Overline is really built to be a hands-on kind of early stage partner in the 0 to 1 stage of a business, that we have a really safe and comfortable place to hand them off to. And so I think, but in general, I think we could use more capital at all stages here in Atlanta. While we've come a really long way as an ecosystem over the last 10 years, we still have work to do. And that's one of the areas where I think we could continue to improve.
Definitely. Yeah. I was going to follow up on that about sort of how do you lure these deep pocketed investors, as you mentioned, who maybe are coastal or just not based in the city, to Atlanta. And once they're here, how do you guys thinking about how the ecosystem can make sure that they're here to stay once they do arrive?
So I'll just tell you how I work with some of mainly the West Coast investors who are looking for talent here in Atlanta and most of them are looking at it because of the companies that we've already invested in. And so they have an interest in our portfolio. And so for us, it is, developing that relationship, like Sean said, because after us, we know there's someone else who needs to pick it up when we start to leave off. For us, it's around Series A. And so for me, I've been really cognizant of making relationships, bringing them to town, right? So we've had True Ventures on the West Coast who has come to town, wanted to meet women founders here in Atlanta. So you have a dinner, whatever, but that's a one-off. My goal is like, when are you going to come? When's the next one? What's the follow-up for the portfolio companies, that sort of thing. So keeping that line of communication open. So hopefully they will set up a presence here. There is a, $4 billion fund that I talked to 5 years ago. I have no idea why, but they reached back out to me because now they have a presence here in Atlanta. I think there was one person, and then someone comes back and forth. So I'm trying to be, like Sean said, there's no rough elbows here. We want to be friendly and open and say, hey, we're open for business. Yes, take a look at our portfolio companies. Sure, I'm happy to, curate a dinner for you to kind of see what's happening in the ecosystem. And so it's just being open to, meeting with them and talking with them and hearing about what they think about Atlanta and how we can help them, make some decisions to have a presence here and be ready for when our companies are looking for that type of financing. And so, it is just about having that relationship with them. And we've done it in unconventional ways. Go ahead, Sean.
I know. I think you're exactly right. I think the one thing that you keyed in on there is being present in the community. I think, having the capital is one thing, but having somebody who's here, who's on the ground supporting, founders in their journey, getting to know the local ecosystem is key. Thrilled that we've seen some of the big funds have people here in town. We've got Insight, who's got a investor here, Drive Capital just added somebody here with a specific mandate of Atlanta. Cercano just added a person. We're hearing almost, quarterly of a larger fund putting an outpost here in Atlanta, which is a start. I mentioned before, Mayor Dinkins is doing a great job supporting the ecosystem. He named a tech czar, tech advisor, Donnie Beamer, who's gone out and sort of carrying the Atlanta flag to some of the coastal communities to try to show them all the great things that are happening in our ecosystem. But I think ultimately, and I should also mention Venture Atlanta is, sort of an event, and the innovation month that surrounds Venture Atlanta is a way for our city and the broader community to spotlight all the amazing things that are happening here. And we're continuing to set records as far as the number of outside investors that are coming into the community to see what's happening here. Ultimately, it's going to take winners. And the good news is we're starting to see an increased pace of winners. Obviously, we've had some notable breakouts like Sales Loft and Calendly. Lease Query is, there, Flock Safety, OneTrust, Greenlight Financial that I mentioned before. And I think ultimately it's going to be important for these winners to break out so that founders realize that you can start and build a very large and important company right here in Atlanta, and that the funders will ultimately realize that what we've got here is special and that you can build a unicorn or a decacorn right here in the Atlanta ecosystem. So I think it's just going to take time and more winners.
Yep. So
That was something I was going to get into as well, is this sort of Atlanta has had these big winners, as you mentioned, and there has been exits, but it's not consistent. If you look at, say, the data from someone like PitchBook, it goes up and down. There's good quarters for exits, and then there's some quarters where there are no company exits at all. Right. And I'm curious how you think about the exit environment and how it sort of impacts the overall ecosystem, or if you think, like you mentioned, Sean, you guys are almost there. Like we're almost at that point where maybe we're going to start seeing a lot of exits that'll sort of allow things to click into place. But yeah, I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on how maybe this inconsistent exit environment is impacting the market, and maybe how, when that changes, it could have an effect.
Yeah, being able to time these kind of big notable exits is very, very difficult to do. But I will tell you the one thing that hasn't slowed down is the number of people and organizations and capital that are intentionally leaning into the community to support these founders that are building here. So everything that's happening upstream has been a steady and consistent increase in pace and momentum. And, the outcomes, which are the big celebrated exits, there's a lot of things that go into it right now. Obviously, COVID and this macroeconomic environment has been challenging and has reset valuations across the board, which has sort of, maybe caused some of the ones that were soonicorns or on their way very quickly to become unicorns to take a step back. But I'm confident, and that seeing everything that's happening from an organization and collaboration perspective around, fostering Atlanta as a leading ecosystem for entrepreneurship and innovation, that it's absolutely inevitable that the pace and the number and the consistency of these large, high-profile exits will only continue.
And so one of the things that, and I can't remember the investor that shared this with me, she's from Atlanta, but is on the West Coast, talking about how the data is really skewed. And the fact that we don't tell a good story, right? So there's one data point that we were on par with Austin in terms of exits, but ours took longer to exit, right? The companies here in Atlanta just take longer, but we still have, exits, I guess, similar to theirs. And so the thing is, I don't think Atlanta as a whole, we don't tell our story well enough. We don't talk about our wins. We just get right back to work. And I think that's the thing with Donnie Beamer out of the mayor's office is attempting to do. How do we tell this awesome story that's happening down here? We don't have as much capital as the West Coast, but we are still having an impact, right? In terms of exits, these young entrepreneurs building great companies. And so I think that's one of our biggest flaws, is that we have not been able to tell the Atlanta story. What's our secret sauce? Because there is one here. And so I feel like there was even something that came out over the weekend, and I was like, where does this data come from? It came from Carta, I believe, that said we had only made 64 deals. Like we were near the bottom in terms of deal made. But looking at the numbers, I think it was, I can't forget who was under. It was Miami, I believe. Miami invested in more money, but we made more deals. And so that's not a story. No one is looking at that. We're actually putting money to work at a faster pace than Miami. We're just not writing the check sizes that Miami is writing. And so I think it is our story that just needs to be told in a way. And there's a community of us who are trying to figure that out. There's Startup Atlanta here who wants to do that, right? Bring everything under one umbrella so someone could really tell that story in such a magical way. And I think that, to me, that's our issue. We're doing on pace with a lot of other hubs that are much bigger and broader than we are. And so I think we do good at the level we're at, right? And I think we just need to be recognized that there is something here. And there is something special. And we've had our unicorns, and no, we've not had one to break out, but that doesn't mean there's one on the way, right? That is working hard right now. And so I think just telling that story more succinctly is something that we could do a much better job at.
Yes, Miami, that is something I have always found really interesting about the Atlanta ecosystem. And before we got onto this panel, I went and checked the Q1 numbers. And I don't know, you said you may have gotten those numbers from Carta, but looking at PitchBook has tracked that there was more money invested in startups in Georgia and the Atlanta area in Q1 of this year compared to all of the state of Florida in Q1 of this year. And
Wow.
obviously they have growing hubs in St. Petersburg and in Tampa as well. So I thought that was really interesting. And so you dug into that very well, Shyla, but Sean, I am curious about your thoughts about that as well. Sort of this weird notion that we're all talking about Miami, even though there are ecosystems like Atlanta that are maybe making more of a difference, or maybe putting in, as you said, more of the work to kind of build an actual ecosystem.
Yeah, I think to Shala's point, narrative and storytelling is a big part of it. Miami has just been, Mayor Suarez has just done a incredible job of saying that Miami is open for business and basically accepting, all of the incoming capital from San Francisco that basically essentially just drained out into that ecosystem. And it was magic to see. And I think to a certain extent, that's what our current administration here in Atlanta is trying to replicate, the good parts of that. There's so many different data points out there. PitchBook will put some stuff out, then Cardo will put some stuff out, and they slice and dice by county, by region, by metro area. I think a lot of those data are skewed at times by some of these later stage mega rounds that are hundreds of millions of dollars in a single funding. That could account for many dozens of early stage investments that might be happening here in Atlanta that might get outshined, or at least the way the math is working on a non-volume weighted basis, might get outshined by one nuclear fusion deal, or one extremely large biotech startup. And so again, I'll just make the point that the data is going to tell a story at a moment in time. And what we, from an ecosystem perspective, are really focused on is building a foundation that every step forward is a step forward in permanence, and that we take the entire community with us, and that our starting point for the next generation is always farther along than where it was when we got here. And that's everybody who's in here and getting this flywheel going. And so we've been less caught up as a community in sort of the hype cycle stocks. And so I think we're better positioned because we're building good businesses that are diverse, not only in talent, but in industry, that are focused on building sustainable business, not just trying to get the highest valuation and the biggest round and the biggest headline and a quick exit, but they're talking about jobs and they're talking about sustainability from a business perspective. And so I like our approach here in Atlanta, maybe a little slower on the start, but I think it's going to build the right kind of business ecosystem here for the long run.
Mm-hmm. And sort of going off of that business fundamentals and sort of not going into the hype cycles, it's definitely easy to tell from the numbers as well that after going through the bull markets of 2020, 2021, and then the subsequent pullback kind of across the board in 2022, if you look at the numbers, there was a pullback in Atlanta, but not the same way. There was a pullback in other markets, both established and emerging as well. And so I'm curious, what would you lend some of that, just that sustainability of the market? The market could just keep going, still getting a lot of great numbers every quarter, still sort of backing these companies and being able to grow at a time when other markets are not seeing the same kind of success or the same kind of grit in their own ecosystems.
Yeah, I think some other of the coastal cities, the more mature venture markets, there's just been this mentality that's permeated with many founders that there's just this inexhaustible pile of money that's always going to be available. And I think one of the benefits, and I'm going to say this in the right way, one of the benefits of growing in a market like Atlanta, where capital has been scarce, the best businesses have always found funding, but it hasn't been, sort of as readily available. And I think one of the benefits is the founders here have been focused, at least in the 20 years that I've been here and investing, on building good, solid businesses, not just on the flashiest PowerPoints or the best elevator pitches, but ones that truly have unique differentiation that's sustainable over time, that they've got a unique insight into, and building in a way where they're capital efficient relative to some of the other cities that we've compare ourselves to. I think everything regresses to a mean over time. I think you're going to start seeing the data showing that we're going back to a mean in some of these markets that got hyperinflated. And, I just think our good fundamental blocking and tackling approach that at least the startups that we see here in the community is going to win in the long run. Shala, how about you?
I 100% agree. And I think one of the things that, Sig and I we talked about is like I don't get caught up in the hype of a deal, right? So there were a lot of hype deals that came our way and we said no, because we are looking at a particular founder, a particular company, and hype isn't what we're looking for, right? Can you actually build this business? And so we said no to a lot. And I think that's what works here, right? And so now we said no to a lot. Now we're able to do follow-on to some of our companies who, maybe they've hit a rough patch. We have capital to do follow-on. It's a part of our strategy, but we're putting it where the companies that need it the most. And that happens right now to be in our portfolio. And so we didn't get caught up in high valuations or anything like that. We stayed true to what we had promised, again, to our LPs. And I think that's what's causing us to have, our companies are scaling up, right? They are all trending up, and we feel good about that. And so I think that's going to help us be the differentiator out of all of these other hubs. And it is probably time to tell, but we see it in real time here. But I think because of that, I hate to say cautiously optimistic with our capital, but, I think we're not following the trends, right? We want to set them and then focus on the companies that are building them and have our exits in that way. And so I think that's what served us well so far as an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And definitely thinking about sort of where the ecosystem heads from here. Obviously, we won't be in this bear market forever. What would you guys say is the biggest hurdle or roadblock for the ecosystem to grow from here? And on the flip side of that, what are you most excited about for the next 5 years in the Atlanta ecosystem?
So what I would think is the biggest hurdle, if we don't have something for our talent, right? So whether it's giving them opportunity to build a company, right? We have to have an ecosystem to be able to do that. So providing them with the resources, the capital, and everything else that makes for growing a good company. I've talked to a lot of our talent that left Atlanta, right? And they went to LA, they went to Boston, somewhere on the West Coast. And I'm going, why? Well, they all felt like at that time, they didn't have all the resources necessary to build a great company. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to really nurture that early talent. So here at Zane, that's why we work with the universities, because we want to help them have these students thinking about entrepreneurship, building a great company. And then when they finish school, that they stay here and do that, right? And so that's what's important. That's what's been important for us. Like, how do we nurture the ecosystem and keep the talent here so they don't leave and go to another ecosystem where they feel like it may be better and there's better opportunity. So I think creating opportunity for our talent is where I want to be focused. And I think we are focused as an ecosystem as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern is just not resting on our laurels. We make progress. I think at times in the past, maybe we'll push hard as a community and we'll start getting some success and people will start backing off. And we're in a season where we all just need to keep the momentum and keep the pace. And I think if we do that, things are going to continue to work out great for us as a community. I'll tell you what I'm most excited about is just the pace of innovation that we're already seeing and the creativity of ideas that we're seeing and diversity of ideas that we're seeing. And in particular, now that we've had some big companies grown and some really big and notable exits, we're starting to see the second generation founders coming out of some of the recent successes. Probably not mention any names, but there's been some notable exits here in town, and we're starting to see the ones who were really close, but maybe didn't. You weren't the number one or number two people in those startups, but they were close and early, and they saw what great looks like and saw what is possible. And they're coming out. And so sort of everybody talks about the PayPal mafia and what they've gone on to. We're starting to get those mafias here in multiples. And that's when we really like to engage, is two people with a concept that they built a solution around at their company. And now they want to build a business around it. Perfect. And that's what I'm most excited about, the pace of that we're seeing here.
Definitely Definitely. And knowing we're right up against time, I just wanted to take another second to thank you both for coming on today. This has been really fun. And I feel like I learned a lot about an ecosystem that I thought I knew a lot about, but maybe I did not. So thank you very much, Sean and Shiloh, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.